Hello, and welcome to a crash course on life in the time of COVID. Have you been isolating indoors since March? Well, good for you. Know that you're not alone in this, and congratulations for being able to resist the temptations of bars, clubs, parties, even a trip to the bookstore for the safety of yourself and for Grandma. She
Yes,
especially thanks you.
thank you for thinking of me. I'd pinch your cheeks if I could.
Okay. Take it easy, Grandma. Remember,
Okay.
6 feet apart.
Wait, I have many questions.
Oh, by all means, please ask away.
Okay. Do we still have to shake hands? And how has social distancing changed our interactions? What about appearance? What with masks? How will we know when someone is happy or angry with us? How will I know if my grandson likes my cookies?
Look, I'm glad you asked. For everyone else in the audience, this is my grandma. She's been indoors for quite some time, and she, like many of us, could use a little bit of some refreshing information on what to
The
do with
Amazon
life
boxes have
now
piled
that you
up.
are starting to try and go back to normal. If you have to go outside, and for future reference for when we do have a vaccine. So, these questions that my grandma just asked. We'll answer these and provide some ways that we can improve our interactions using nonverbal communication strategies and techniques. So, let's outline what we will discuss, how touch functions and proxemics in our interactions have changed, and how to be mindful of those changes. How masks have changed our appearance and affected our ability to view facial expressions, and how we can identify different primary emotions when someone is wearing a face mask. So, with all that in mind, Grandma and everyone else, let's begin. When the pandemic began, many of us had no idea how much COVID 19 would affect the way we interact with others. What we consider to be normal is, well, no longer the case.
Mm-mm.
It is important to learn how these changes in communication will affect your interactions with others in the world. Not only to be able to function in this changed new world, but to also keep yourself and others safe during these strange times. So, one of the biggest changes in our interactions have been with touch or haptics.
Oh.
Oh,
What's that? What's
yeah,
that?
I'll answer that.
Okay.
Haptics is the study of the type, amount, uses, and effects of touch. Touching can be one of the most powerful forms of nonverbal communication as it can elicit both positive and negative reactions depending on the circumstances. During COVID, touching another in public can certainly result in a negative reaction. So, don't take it personally if you go to hug a friend and they flinch or step back. It's just them playing it safe. After spending many months inside, you and many others may be experiencing effects of skin hunger. Dun dun dun.
Can my skin eat homemade cookies?
Oh, Grandma, it's not that type of hunger.
Oh,
Look, skin hunger is the strongly felt need for touching resulting from insufficient physical contact. I'm sure that sounds like something many of us have experienced during lockdown. Other forms of touch that you should try to avoid during this time are things like shaking hands, which would be considered a social polite function of touch. Instead, be polite to your social interactions and just wave or nod your head. These can still be seen as good alternatives that still allow you to greet while maintaining social distancing.
I've been stuck at home all this time watching reruns of Golden Girls and the
Yeah.
Avatar show on Netflix. Can you explain social distancing, Sonny?
Well, okay. Let's explain a bit about the virus first. COVID
Okay.
is spread through close contact, which means that it's best to maintain a distance of 6 feet to keep safe. Our greetings, like handshaking and kissing on the cheek, are something we cannot currently do because of the new rules as society have put in to keep safe. And while that may seem like a drastic change to someone who hasn't shook another's hand in 8 months, it might not be so abnormal to greet physically in the future. Look, according to research by Tiffany Field, director of Touch Research Institute at the University of Miami, Her data shows that physical gestures were already appeared to be declining before the pandemic. Dr. Field spent over the last 15 months analyzing behaviors of people at airport gates around the world and found that they spend most of their pre-boarding time in airports engaged on their phones and not with other travelers. So, as people continue to keep their distance, they will have to rely on other forms of nonverbal and verbal communication to greet one another. I believe that bows and head nods and waving will gain favor as non-touch greetings, and it is important to note that while you may not experience symptoms of COVID or have any reason to believe that you have it, avoiding touching others is key in order to keep your close circle or your bubble safe. While on the subject of social distancing, our function of proxemics, or ways that humans use and communicate with space, have certainly changed, and what used to be the outline of conversational distance has changed as well. Take, for example, seeing a friend you haven't seen in months. Normally, you'd want to go up to them and hug them to greet them, but because of COVID, we have had to change that norm to provide a sense of safety for others and ourselves. Rules are getting rewritten for our social interactions, and we have to try to adapt for the sake of others. Rather than getting close to another person to engage in more intimate or personal conversation, speak up and avoid those conversational zones, keeping yourself 6 feet apart. Yes.
6 feet apart, yes.
Let's move on to the hardest change in our interactions in communication. The changes in appearance due to face masks and how that affects our ability to interpret facial expressions and identify primary emotions. The biggest change we've had to our worldview is now we are interacting while being masked. We rely on people's faces so much that this has caused a challenge for us to adapt. Whether subconscious or intentional, our facial expressions are the most important forms of communication, particularly with regard to expressing and perceiving each other's emotions. Can you tell what type of emotion I'm giving right now?
I don't know.
I bet you guessed wrong.
I did.
Now, it is so much harder to identify emotions and expressions without the help of the facial expressions that our face masks cover up. We are putting more effort into our eyes to express what we feel to others.
Sonny,
Yes,
I
Grandma?
see the people outside wearing their masks, but I cannot tell what they are feeling, and
Well,
it makes me sad.
Grandma, I'd say you're not alone. Look,
Oh.
in order to keep you and other immunocompromised individuals safe, masks have been key to slowing down the virus, but masks have become direct hindrances to our ability to comprehend and empathize with others in public. Since
I
most
agree.
masks block the bottom half of our face, it becomes significantly more difficult to recognize the emotions of someone wearing a mask, namely those that are positive, such as happiness or friendliness, which are largely communicated and identified by a smile. So, let's take this mask for example. The average face mask will typically allow us to view only the squinting half of the smile, which diminishes genuineness.
And I can't see those yummy cheeks.
Thank you, I know.
Yes.
Yes, Grandma.
Cheeks.
Okay, as we continue to cover our faces in public, in our new normal, without practice, and this is key, without practice, it will only get harder to interpret our facial expressions, and it will be easier to misinterpret them. Since masks cover up, this leaves only the top half of the face for an observer to use as a means of detecting another person's emotions. While we may exaggerate our eyes to squint in place of a smile, the person looking at us is still left with incomplete information, and they can make the wrong assumptions about what we intend to make. So, the importance of the eyes and mouth in emotions of our face has allowed us to group emotions systematically into the upper face and lower face expressions. Focusing on one half without the other makes us prone to confuse certain emotions for other ones, which is in the time of COVID why we need to practice.
Okay.
When viewing the upper half of the face mask, we tend to confuse anger with disgust,
Yes, the
respectively.
mailman.
I have just done both of those. But to someone with an untrained eye, they look the same.
Oh.
Yes, Grandma?
Yes, the mailman stepped on poop the other day, and I could not tell which one he was making, anger or disgust.
That might have been both. Okay, look.
Likely so.
Since COVID, our function to interpret expressions has changed. We are not conditioned to communicate or express our emotions in this manner. This leads to significant emotional misperception and negative facial feedback from our facial expressions that directly impact our moods.
I see what you mean, Sonny, but what if that's not enough? Are there creative solutions to show you are friendlier like a sweet grandma
okay.
me?
Creative solutions. I'm glad you asked. See,
Yes.
Facial expressions before COVID-19 pandemic could be done directly. However, during this pandemic and our new normal, facial expressions cannot be done directly because some faces are covered with masks. I've stated this before. Reiterate.
Yes, you have.
So,
you have.
until we
Thank
can
you.
slowly adapt and get better at identifying expressions, Nikadek Giuliantari suggests this solution.
Oh.
Instead of expressing facial expressions, character masks can be used instead, such as this one here.
I like it.
With this
Looks
mask,
good on you.
I am always smiling, and
Yes, you
that
are.
seems to make my interactions with others much more friendly. But we should still practice the different primary emotions on a person to try and identify them on a person wearing a face mask. Let's break to that.
Okay.
Let's go through the primary emotions of our facial expressions. Let's begin with sadness. Sadness would entail that your inner corner of your eyebrows are drawn up. The upper eyelids of the corners are raised, and the corners of the lips are drawn down. But because we cannot see the lips, we have to rely on the eyebrows and the eyelids. So here would be what I can try and create for sadness. There you go. Let's move on to anger. Anger would entail that your eyebrows are lowered and drawn together. The eyelids are tense and may be raised. The eyes have a hard stare. The nose flares, and the lips are pressed firmly together or open and tense as if shouting. But because we are only privy to the upper half of the facial features, we can only see the eyes and eyebrows. Thankfully, you might have a mask that is able to display this, whether your nose is flaring, your lips are pressed firmly. It might look like this. Hopefully, you're not so close that you can tell what is happening here. But if that helps, it certainly can help you identify. Why is that? Because the next primary emotion is disgust, which is often confused with anger. Disgust means that the upper lip is raised, the lower lip is also raised and either pushed up to the upper lip or lower, slightly protruding. The nose is wrinkled, like this. The cheeks are raised. The lines show the lower eyelids and the lid is pushed up, but not tense. The eyebrows are lowered, lowering the upper eyelid. And thus you have disgust, which can also be anger. So really pay attention to the eyes. Next, let's move on to fear. Fear would entail that the eyebrows are raised and drawn together, wrinkles on forehead. I can't seem to have very good wrinkles on my forehead, but the wrinkles on your forehead are centered and not across the entire forehead. The upper eyelids are raised and the lower eyelids are drawn up. The mouth is open, lips are either tense slightly and drawn back or stretched and drawn back. Since we cannot see them, try and imagine them. Moving on to surprise. In surprise, your eyebrows are raised and curved high. Skin below the brow is stretched. Horizontal wrinkles across the forehead. You can see just a little bit on my low-res camera. The eyelids are open and the upper lids are raised and the lower lids are drawn down. The white of the eyes are shown above the iris and often below too. This, I think, is much easier to tell when someone is surprised wearing a face mask, especially if you really look at the eyes. And lastly is happiness. Happiness means that your wrinkle runs down the nose, the cheeks are raised, which could, depending on the mask, be easier or harder to see. Lower eyelids show wrinkles below them. And the crow's feet wrinkles go outwards from the corner of the eyes, as you can see right here. Alright, hopefully with this, Grandma and you at home can better prepare for the new normal that we are a part of in the world due to COVID. Hopefully this helps you better adapt and cope with the changing interactions in our communication. Remember to keep your distance, wash your hands, stay safe, and wear your mask.